video of the Valley of Fear Act 2 Scene 4, Sherlock Holmes investigation scene. Now the play shifts to a completely different setting and tone. This scene involves characters like Dr. Watson, Holmes, and others focusing on a murder investigation. So, a man, Mr. Douglas, has been killed, as you know earlier, and the case is being examined carefully. Watson, the investigator, begins analyzing the evidence. A sleeper, house shoe, stained with blood, then a footprint, mark of a foot near the window. He compares the sleeper to the footprint and concludes that the footprint matches the sleeper exactly. Now, this leads to a major discovery. What is that major discovery here? The evidence was planted, like it was deliberately placed to mislead, meaning the victim himself created the footprint to give a false clue, like a wrong direction to the police. This now suggests that the story told earlier is a lie, like it's a false account. Now there is suspicion on Mrs. Douglas. Attention then turns to Mrs. Douglas, the victim's wife. Watson observes her behavior. She does not act like a grieving wife. She leaves her husband's body quickly. She does not even say a proper farewell. Now, this shows a lack of proper behavior, especially in serious situations. This kind of now you can say like this makes her seem suspicious. Then comes the ring mystery, which is actually a really important part of the scene. Another strange detail: the murderer supposedly removed a wedding ring, like a symbol of marriage, then replaced it with a snake ring, a decorative ring like that is shaped like a snake. Watson now finds this illogical. A real killer would not do something so unnecessary, because obviously the murderer removing the wedding ring that is a symbol of marriage and then replacing it with a snake ring, obviously that is actually really unnecessary and strange. So the conclusion here is that the story is inconsistent, like it does not make sense. It is likely fabricated, like it is made up. Then moving on, Holmes begins by referring to the sequence of events after the crime. He explains that a man, Ames, the caretaker, claimed he reached the room within a minute of hearing the gunshot. Holmes points out that this is important because it means there was very little time for the murderer to carry out complicated actions. Watson suggests that perhaps the wedding ring was taken from Douglas before the murder, but Holmes quickly rejects this idea. He reminds Watson that Douglas was known to be a fearless and devoted to his wife, like he was known to be a fearless man. So it is highly unlikely that he would willingly give up his wedding ring, which is a symbol of marriage and commitment. Holmes then reasons that the ring must have been taken after the murder. Now this creates a new question here. Like, how did the murderer have enough time to do that? Holmes confidently explains that the murderer must have been alone with the body for some time, possibly with a lamp, meaning that the crime was not as sudden as it appeared. Holmes then shifts attention to an important clue involving sound. He recalls that Mrs. Allen, the housekeeper, mentioned hearing something like a door slamming about half an hour before the alarm was raised. Watson becomes excited and asks if that sound could have been the gunshot. Holmes agrees and says that this was likely the real moment of the murder, not the time when everyone was alerted. So, this is now a key turning point in the scene, you can say. How is this now a key turning point? Like, because it suggests that there was a delay, like there was a gap of time between the murder and the alarm being raised. Holmes now raises a crucial question, important question. What were Mr. Barker and Mrs. Douglas doing during that half hour? Their behavior becomes suspicious because they were present but did not immediately report the crime. Watson directly asks if they are guilty, but Holmes comments on Watson's appalling directness. Appalling directness means like very blunt and straightforward questioning. Instead of jumping to conclusions, Holmes prefers logical analysis. He then introduces a very important clue, the missing dumbbell. Then what happens that Watson is confused and does not see its importance, but Holmes insists that the entire case hangs upon it. So this now shows that how Holmes actually notices small but significant details that others ignore. Watson, however, becomes a bit impatient, like he becomes easily annoyed and suggests that Barker and Mrs. Douglas's are in a conspiracy. Now, conspiracy here means like they are involved in a secret plan to hide the truth and possibly they killed Mr. Douglas themselves. Holmes partially agrees that they may be hiding something, but he strongly disagrees that they are the murderers. Holmes then explains why this theory is weak. He points out several difficulties. First, why would they use a cut off shotgun, which would make a lot of noise and attract attention? Second, how could they be so sure that no one would hear it when in fact Mrs. Ellen almost did? Third, why would they remove the wedding ring after death, which would only make them look suspicious? So, these questions show that the idea of them being the killers is illogical. Like, it does not make sense. Watson admits that he cannot explain these points. Now, this actually highlights Holmes' superior reasoning. Holmes then suggests a new possibility that instead of being murderers, Barker and Mrs. Douglas may know the truth and are trying to conceal it, like they're trying to hide it for some reason. Finally, Holmes begins to propose a different line of thought. He asks Watson to imagine that there was some kind of arrangement made at the request of Mr. Douglas himself before his death. So, this now suggests that the events might not be as simple as murder, but part of a deeper and more complex situation. Then, what happens? Holmes then again suggests a new possibility about the motive behind the crime. He proposes that the murderer might be connected to some past vendetta, like it might be connected to revenge or feud, possibly from Douglas's earlier life or first marriage. So this means the killer may not be random, but someone with a deep personal grudge. Holmes then imagines a situation where after the murder, Mr. Barker and Mrs. Douglas's may have actually encountered the killer before he escaped. So, according to this idea, the killer might have threatened them by saying that if they tried to stop or arrest him, he would reveal some hideous scandal like a shocking and disgraceful secret about Douglas. So, out of fear of the secret becoming public, they may have agreed to let him go and even helped him escape by lowering the drawbridge, a movable bridge over a moat, and basically it is used here as part of the whole house structure. So then what happens that Watson finds this explanation possible but still doubtful, especially when he asks about the bicycle, which is another important clue. Holmes explains that the killer likely believed he was safe and he used the bicycle as a means of escape. However, Holmes then points out something more important. After the murder, Barker and Mrs. Douglas may have realized that they themselves could be suspected. So, in a rather clumsy, like poorly planned or awkward way, they tried to fabricate, invent false evidence to mislead the investigation. For example, they may have created the impression that the murderer escaped through the window and they delayed raising the alarm for about half an hour to cover up what really happened during that time. So, Holmes' theory is that the actual crime happened earlier than reported, and the delay was used to arrange the scene and hide the truth. Watson then asks how Holmes plans to prove all this. Holmes replies that he needs time alone to investigate further. This now shows his method of working quietly and independently. He even asks for Watson's umbrella, suggesting that he is preparing for some kind of experiment or observation during the night. So at this point, the other investigators like MacDonald and Mason bring new information. They report that they have traced the bicycle to a man who stayed at the Eagle Hotel, a lodging place. So this man is described as about 50 years old, wary, he's thin but strong, like serious and confident in appearance. He is interestingly somewhat resembling Douglas himself. He wore a heavy coat and carried a weapon, likely a gun. So, this now strengthens the idea that an outsider was indeed involved in the crime. Holmes then analyzes the use of the gun. He explains that if the murderer had intended to shoot Douglas outside, the sound would not have attracted much attention. However, since Douglas did not come outside, the killer must have entered the house and waited for the right moment. So, this shows that the crime was planned rather than sudden. So, Holmes actually now summarizes his theory very clearly. The murder happened half an hour earlier than reported. Barker and Mrs. Douglas were present afterward. They allowed the murderer to escape, possibly out of fear. They created false evidence to mislead others. MacDonald and Watson react by saying that if this is true, then either Barker or Mrs. Douglas must be hiding the truth. Holmes agrees that there are still many difficulties in the case, which is why he decides to conduct his own private investigation that night. He invites the others to meet him later at the Vestry Arms, an inn or lodging place, showing that he is moving the investigations forward step by step. However, he insists that for now, he only needs darkness, like privacy and secrecy, and Watson's silence, as he wants to think without interruption. Finally, Holmes leaves them with a very important and mysterious question. Why would an athletic man, like a physically strong person, train with only one dumbbell instead of a pair? So, this small detail, which seems unimportant to others, is actually crucial to Holmes. It suggests that something is unusual or hidden, and that the answer to the entire mystery may depend on understanding this strange clue. Thank you.